Welcome everyone to the Q1 2022 webinar for the California MBA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'm very happy that you could join us today. I'm Susan Milazzo. I'm CEO of the California MBA, and we are thrilled to have you and present this information for today's webinar. This is a presentation that actually initially launched at our Legal Issues and Reg Compliance Conference in December, and it was so well received, we decided to share it more broadly through our webinar series. So I was very happy that our speakers could join us again today. We move to the agenda. Today's presentation will include discussion regarding strategies for a successful corporate DE&I program. You know, part of the mission of this committee is to be able to share resources with our members and the industry on how they can successfully create or expand a diversity, equity, and inclusion corporate program within their own companies. So we have some great content from our speakers today, and I'm excited to get into today's presentation. But before we get to that part, I would like to thank our DE&I committee sponsor for 2022, Prime Lending. And today we have Darren Houston from Prime here representing the company. And Darren, thank you for your support.
Good morning, absolutely. Thank you for having me and Prime Lending as your sponsor for this year, and looking forward to a collaborative effort on how to increase the diversity within corporate standings and companies, and what we're doing as a company, Prime Lending, and what I'm doing here locally in San Diego. So we're happy and excited to be a part of this program today and for the year. And it's hugely important to talk about diversity and inclusion, and not only as we are mortgage bankers, and I'm a mortgage loan originator here in San Diego. We also want to talk about within the industry, within corporate, within our companies. And so, are we having diversity, and are we bridging the gap of home ownership and having people that actually work and represent the communities that we're serving? So I think it's hugely important to have these dialogues and conversations. I get to wear three hats. I'm also the local chapter president for the National Association of Real Estate Property Brokers, and as a Prime Lending loan originator, I'm able to be in the community and provide a advocacy standpoint and leadership standpoint in reference to what we're doing as a company, what we're doing to, like I said, bridge the gap of diversity and bring awareness to our communities, biopic communities here in the United States, and specifically in San Diego. So thank you all for the opportunity. Just to reiterate, Prime Lending, we've hired as a company, we've made an initiative to hire more minority or Black and Hispanic loan officers. We started an intern program with the historical Black communities, historical Black colleges, to work with a summer intern program. And we have $1 million commitment for our Neighborhood Edge program for closing cost credits for low to moderate income families up to 120% of the median income in that community. So we, as a company, as a culture internally, are vested in bringing diversity and equality in housing. So thank you again for the opportunity, very kindly.
Well, I appreciate that, Darren. It sounds like you are leading by example. So congratulations to you and to Prime Lending. And we're looking forward to a strong partnership with you this year to hopefully bring that message to more and more companies within the industry. So thank
Absolutely.
you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that brings us to, I'd like to introduce today's panelists and get the presentation started. Sam, we can go to the next slide. And talk about, again, strategies for a successful corporate DE&I program. I'd like to share with all of you that are participants today, if you have a question for any of the speakers, you can pose those in the Q&A dialog box, and we'll get to those at the conclusion of the presentation. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce my very good friend and member of my board of directors and CEO for QCP Systems, Rosalind Hardy.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. and to do this encore presentation through the webinar with everyone that we did at the Legal and Regulatory Compliance Conference this past year. I think you all are going to be extraordinarily pleased and excited about what you're going to hear from our upcoming speakers as we talk about diversity and inclusion. And real quickly, as we work this issue, I just want everyone to listen intently. And if you're on your cell phones, text your peers and those that you know in the industry and let them know that the California MBA is in fact working through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee to bring about these webinars, to share with you what other companies are doing, and to provide you with resources so that you can be very intentional. Now, that's my new word, being very intentional about what we're doing in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the inclusion part is as important as the diversity part, because as you diversify your organizations, it's important that all the employees that you are so wonderfully welcoming into your companies, that they feel included, that they feel welcome, that they feel part of. And I just encourage you all to listen very carefully. Our next speaker that's going to be coming up first is Kelly Bourbon. She is with Baker Tilly. She's going to share with us about what these initials mean, ESG. Okay, we already know about the DEI, but there are laws and regulations out there that we should be aware of that play into this space. And so she's going to help us to understand what all this means from a legal standpoint. And she is just a wealth of knowledge, and she's passionate about this issue from the standpoint of diversity. So at this point, I turn it over to you, Kelly, and tell us all about the legal aspect of this new law and what we have to look forward to.
Well, thank you, Rosalind. I so appreciate that introduction. I think, Sam, you can go ahead and flip to the next slide for me. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Kelly Bourbon. I am a manager in Baker Tilly's Financial Services Risk Advisory Practice, and I'm actually based in London as of very recently. I used to be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm now in London. You may have noticed I don't have the beautiful natural light coming in as my fellow panelists do. It's a little dark here. So that's where I'm at, and that's why I apologize for the low light, but that's why. I want to first extend my thanks to California MBA for asking me to come back and join these inspirational people, my fellow panelists, once again to speak about this incredibly important topic. Maybe as a quick introduction to me, so you know who's talking at you right now, I've spent my entire career working with clients in the financial services industry. I've done engagements such as providing assurance in the form of financial statement audits and SOC reporting, as well as advising over topics like ESG, internal controls, Sarbanes-Oxley, and COSO. ESG, and by extension DEI, is a topic that I am incredibly passionate about, and I'm just so thrilled to be speaking with you all this morning. I'm going to take the first 10 or so minutes of this presentation to just introduce the concepts of ESG and DEI, how they relate to one another, and why they're so important. So lately, it's hard to go more than a week or so, it feels, without hearing something about ESG. You may feel like your inbox is saturated with ESG webinar invites, ESG news, current or future ESG regulations, and it can get really overwhelming. With the ubiquity of ESG in today's business landscape, many of you may already know what the acronym stands for. Maybe you even know a basic definition of the concept, but if you don't, or as a refresher, ESG stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance, and it encompasses the consideration of these three factors alongside financial factors in the investment and business decision-making process. ESG has become an incredibly hot topic in today's business world, and organizations are finding themselves under increasingly high pressure to engage in and report on their efforts to positively impact their stakeholders and society at large. Most notably, this pressure is coming from investors, rating agencies, regulators, and the general public. Sam, would you mind flipping to the next slide for me? This slide depicts some very high-level examples of each of the three components of ESG. So from an environmental standpoint, topics like carbon emissions, pollution and waste, and environmental finance, which attempts to use financial instruments to counteract the negative impacts of climate change. All of these fall within the E category. Some examples of more specific topics within the S or social category includes human capital development, employee health and safety, and community relations. Now, the S or social category is generally considered to be the newest focus of the ESG world, especially in the US, with recent social and political events like the COVID-19 pandemic and the murder of George Floyd really solidifying this category at the top or near the top of many organizations' lists of priorities. Finally, corporate governance, which includes concepts like business ethics, tax transparency, and board composition. This category is really the bread and butter of the financial services industry. You've all been exposed to these ideas for a very, very long time, just simply due to the massive amounts of regulations that the industry is held to. That makes this the most mature and probably the most familiar ESG category for most of you. So some of you may be thinking at this point, hey, wait a minute, I thought this was about DEI. I'm getting there. Flip to the next slide for me, Sam. So I know, another acronym, I get it. It's a little bit of an alphabet soup sometimes at our workplaces. This one's really, really important though. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it refers to programs and policies that encourage representation of diverse groups of people. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. Let's break down the three components of DEI. The D, or diversity category, refers to the human makeup of an organization. This includes people of different genders, races and ethnicities, abilities and disabilities, religions, cultures, ages, sexual orientations, as well as people with diverse backgrounds, experiences, skills, and expertise. I don't know how many of you on the phone have watched or have heard of the show Suits. It's on Netflix right now. It's a scripted drama about a law firm and the dealings that go on in there. And one of the characteristics of the law firm is that they only hire from Harvard. That's their big thing. We only hire from Harvard. And that is, it's an extreme example, but that is a great way to not have very much diversity in your organization. Maybe you're only looking at certain schools when you're doing your recruiting. That's a great way to narrow the focus of your organization and put yourself in a box almost. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but when you have a diverse workforce, your creativity blossoms. You have people from different perspectives and different experiences who can come in and contribute their ideas. So that's diversity. Equity is the concept of giving every individual what they need to be successful. Now, this isn't to be confused with equality, right? Equality is about giving everyone the same platform, whereas equity is about making sure everyone reaches the same heights. When we did this in person in December in San Diego, I gave the analogy of if all of us on the panel stood up on the table, we're all standing on the same platform, our feet are all level with one another, but maybe I'm a little bit taller than someone else who's standing next to me. And so maybe I can reach up and I can touch the ceiling. And the person next to me can't. Maybe they need a step stool or they need something to help them boost up and touch the ceiling. That's the difference between equity and equality. Equality is all of us standing on the table, but we're reaching different heights. Equity is making sure that everyone's heads are at the same level. Last, but absolutely not least, is inclusion. And Rosalind, you hit the nail on the head when you said that it is one of the most crucial elements of this alphabet soup that was DEI, right? If you don't have the I, in your DEI program, the D and the E don't matter. You need to make sure that everyone's values and perspectives are considered equally. All three categories are certainly very, very important, but the I is critical. Flip to the next slide for me for a second. Now, I started this presentation talking about ESG, just to circle it back around. ESG and DEI are intrinsically linked because if you flip to the next slide and you zoom in on the S of ESG, it's really not going to be too long until you stumble upon DEI. They're very, very hand in hand in that element. Next slide, please. Let's talk about why it's so important. They are much, much easier to talk about. It's so much easier for me to sit here and talk to you about what DEI is, as it's much more difficult to be someone in Bianca's shoes, and she'll talk to you about why later. It's so much harder to implement it than it is to just sit here and talk about it. It's even harder to achieve it. You're going to hear, like I said, some amazing success stories here in a moment. But first I want to explain and kind of tee up why DEI is so important. What are the benefits that we can get from it? So this slide displays some of the most impactful benefits of DEI. Most importantly, successful DEI initiatives foster an environment of inclusion and belonging. We all want to feel like we belong at work and everywhere in our lives, and DEI really aims to do just that. When we feel included and we feel valued, our creativity blossoms. And when a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace exists, a multitude of perspectives are suddenly present and are considered. So if you're hiring only from Harvard Law, you're only going to have people who took the same law classes, who had the same professors. You're only going to get that narrow focus. Whereas if you branch out and you hire people who have had different backgrounds, different education, different walks of life, you're going to see that those perspectives suddenly broaden and your creativity is going to go through the roof. Believe it or not, DEI also leads to increased financial performance. A recent McKinsey study found that organizations who promoted DEI were 35% more likely to achieve above average returns. Finally, all of us on this call have probably been impacted in one way or another by the Great Resignation, right? Job market's hot, people are leaving, changing jobs all the time. DEI can help with that too. DEI promotes increased levels of employee engagement and retention, and it opens the door to top talent. Millennials and Gen Z consistently rank DEI as a top value for them when it comes to organizations that they want to work for. They're the future leaders of the corporate world, and DEI is very high on their list of demands and requirements. And I can speak to that personally too. I've left an employer for a different employer because the employer I joined had a much more explicit and attractive stance on DEI than my current employer. It happens much more frequently than you think. It's very important to people who are in that generation, millennials, or in the Gen Z age group. Next slide, please. If the previous slide didn't inspire you to become your organization's biggest ESG and DEI cheerleader, maybe understanding what the current and future state of these two concepts looks like will. The mortgage banking industry in particular, to echo Darren's comments, plays a significant role in providing an equitable economic footing for all consumers and businesses, and in helping to close homeownership and wealth gaps. According to the US Census Bureau, in the first quarter of 2020, just 44% of Black families owned their home, which is compared to 74% of white families. And that's despite there being nearly 3.4 million Black Americans who meet the criteria to qualify for a mortgage, but have not purchased a home. Why might this be? In order to cater to a broader, more diverse pool of consumers, some mortgage lenders are beginning to engage in alternative credit scoring models, which uses data like location, utility payments profiles, and even social media to expand the scope of customers who can be catered to. And we believe innovation like this will continue to impact the industry. From a regulatory standpoint, little to no reporting is currently required for most organizations, but this is expected to change. Currently, SEC registrants are only required to disclose human capital metrics like diversity stats and employee turnover rates. But an announcement from the SEC on required climate-related disclosures, that's the E in ESG, is expected very soon. While ESG and DEI reporting for private organizations is currently entirely voluntary, as stakeholder demand for this information increases, required disclosures are going to follow. And maybe speaking of stakeholders, if your organization is considering implementing an ESG or a DEI program, one of the most crucial first steps is to identify your stakeholders. From an ESG and DEI perspective, the term stakeholders is generally used a little bit more broadly than you might be used to. Of course, it's going to include the usual suspects like the board, investors, regulatory bodies, but it also is going to include employees, rating agencies, the media, the community in which you operate, and the general public. It's much more broad. And each stakeholder is going to expect something different when it comes to ESG and DEI. So identifying and understanding what they want and need is very important. Next slide, please. Now, I'm an auditor at heart, so I would be remiss if I did not provide some tips for effective governance over an organization's ESG or DEI program. We tend to break this out into 4 quadrants, steps, milestones, however you want to think of it, but they are to assess, implement, integrate, and to control. I won't go into detail on all 4 of these today, but just know this. The end goal should be to implement effective internal control over ESG data collection, processing, and reporting. It's not going to happen overnight. This is a long-term plan for an organization if you're starting from nothing or very little. But at the end of the day, a mature ESG program should seamlessly integrate with your organization's ERM or enterprise risk management program. So that's the end of my comments on ESG DEI. I hope you were able to take something away from this, and I hope I set up the rest of the panelists really well here now that you have an introduction to what these concepts mean. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I'm going to be around until the end of the presentation, so if there are any questions, please feel free to submit them.
Let me unmute myself. Well, I appreciate all that you have shared with us, Kelly, and I hope everyone was listening intently. And one of the great things about the Cal MBA is that they do record these sessions. So when this is over, you can actually access this webinar on the website for the California MBA. If you want to hear and actually have access to the presentation that Kelly used as well to help your organizations in doing that, and to really, as she was trying to encourage us all to remember, this is good business, just in general. This is just good business as well. And so having said that, and we thank Kelly again, we want to now go to Natalie Vance, who is going to talk to us. Natalie is with Kleindis PC, and she's going to give us a little bit more about her background and why this is so important and passionate to her. She actually heads up and leads the DE&I initiatives there in her particular law firm. They are actively involved with the committee here at the Cal MBA DE&I, and she's going to give us the legal perspective a little bit more in depth. And I don't know, and I don't mean to spring this on you, Natalie, but maybe you can touch on this pending potential law, the CRA, for the non-depository institutions, which is hanging out there. in Sacramento as something they want to push forward. And as we kind of close this out, I'm gonna share some thoughts that I have about what the industry perhaps can do to help us even deal with that part of the legal aspects of what's coming down. So having said all that, I am so happy to introduce to you Natalie Vance. Natalie.
Hi, thank you so much, Rosalind. I am the Chief Diversity Officer at my law firm. We're a law firm of over 80 lawyers with 4 offices in California, offices in Arizona, and Nevada, and Washington State as well. And so, you know, we have been looking at DEI for some time, but have only recently made it a priority, I think, from the top down with respect to making it a specific part of the law firm's strategic plan. And so part of my role in the firm is to implement the strategic plan with respect to DEI, which involves taking a look at what we've done so far, what we are currently doing, and what we could be doing in the future on how to implement new programs so that we are meeting all 3 of the DEI initiatives with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion for our personnel. And I think that as a lawyer, you know, you need to look at both the things that you can be doing practically and also ensuring that what you're doing is not creating more risk for the organization. And I was initially asked as part of the original presentation to kind of give the legal perspective on the risks of having a DEI program. And really, from my perspective, the risk that you have as an organization is far greater by not having one. So I would first say that you increase the risk to the organization by not having DEI in a couple of ways. One, you just have people who are unaware, if they have not had the proper training about how to include and incorporate diverse candidates into the workplace, about how to be intentional in terms of how they are acting. And you have employees who are at a far greater risk of leaving your organization because they are unhappy, because they're not being included, because they're not being treated equitably. And so if you want to have a culture where everyone feels included and where everyone wants to stay and be a part of the team, then I think DEI must be a component of that. The risk really comes from whenever you make a hiring, promotion, or disciplinary decision that is based on race, national origin, gender expression, or any other protected characteristic. You just can't do that. And that occurs whether it's negative or positive. You should not be making decisions based on protected categories. But you should be trying to diversify your workforce for all of the benefits that are included. And the way to do that, I think Kelly made a good example. If you're only hiring from one organization, or if you're only hiring from your alma mater, if you're only hiring people who played soccer on a particular team or live in a particular area, you know, those are ways that you limit your applicant pool. And if you're only seeing one type of applicant, that's the only type of applicant that you're going to hire. You're not going to diversify your workplace. So from a recruiting standpoint, there are several things you can do to increase the types and number of applicants that you get from diverse backgrounds, which in turn will lead to hiring of more diverse applicants as you find more and more wonderful qualified employees from those backgrounds. But the only way to hire them is if you're actually looking at them in the first instance. So ways to increase diversity in recruiting and hiring starts with increasing the pool of diverse applicants. There are a couple of programs that are initiatives designed to assist organizations with doing that. In the legal field, we have what's called the Mansfield Rule, which is that at least 30% of job applicants for any leadership or governance position must be diverse. So before you make that hiring decision, make sure that you're including diverse job applicants in that process and considering them as well. The Rooney Rule, which comes from the NFL, is to include at least one diverse or female candidate for coaching or general manager positions in the NFL. And that has resulted in more diverse coaching staffs within those organizations as well. But I think you should take it further. Look to increase the number of diverse candidates. And how do you do that? Well, you start by going where the diverse candidates are. So, look for organizations and affinity groups that have diverse candidates and pools that you can recruit from. Go to Howard Law, which is a historically Black college, to look for candidates and recruit. Go to various organizations within colleges and universities, affinity groups that support diverse students, and recruit from there. Look for fellowships and internship programs that include diverse candidates to recruit from. And Bianca will be talking next about a wonderful program that you can use to recruit diverse candidates into your organization, and the Access Lending Academy. So that would be one option as well that you should consider for bringing recruiting diverse candidates into your organization. When you're putting out job ads, think about the language you're using. Are you using language that excludes an entire category of candidates? And so rethink the word choice in your descriptions. There are programs online where you can run your job descriptions and your ad copy through them to look for gendered words, to look for words that might be offensive to a particular category of person, and to weed out words that might otherwise limit your applicant pool. You can avoid problems by avoiding superlatives and adjectives that may essentially imply a certain type of candidate. Words like independent, aggressive, strong tend to be masculine words and may turn off female applicants. Words like young, healthy, great opportunity for a student may limit the age of applicants who feel comfortable applying for that job. So look out for words that might be dangerous, and look for words that are more neutral but still describe the skills of the job. So you want to look at skills-based hiring as opposed to adjective-based hiring. We want someone who can come in and do the job, but how they do the job may be different than what you have traditionally had within your firm. So be open to new and creative ways to perform the work. That will not only provide you with a more diverse work pool and people who feel more comfortable working with you, but it will also provide new ways of doing business that perhaps you haven't considered before, that may be more effective and open you up to whole new lines of business and whole new ways of doing the work. Block certain information from resumes when you're doing resume screening so that you have more blind resume screening. Sometimes names may signal a particular background, and so blocking out names will also prevent gender-based discrimination that may happen on an unconscious level. Blocking out addresses, because where someone lives could provide information that could generate unconscious biases. And taking out the work, hobbies, and volunteer work that someone engages in may also prevent unconscious biases from occurring. If you look at someone's resume, there may be certain hobbies that signal a certain level of privileged background, such as someone who was engaged in horseback riding, which tends to be an expensive activity, versus someone who plays pickup basketball. So these are all things that you want to screen for to avoid unconscious bias in the candidate selection process. Use diverse hiring panels to reduce the unconscious bias that we all have, and try not to let hiring pressures dictate your decision. Sometimes we need to hire someone quickly, and that prevents us from taking the extra steps to ensure that we have and are considering diverse candidates in the pool. And again, compare candidates for skills rather than against each other and other characteristics that would be impermissible in the hiring process. And then second, and another very important part has been discussed earlier, is just ensuring you have that inclusive work culture, a culture that employees want to be a part of and feel some allegiance to. You're going to have far greater efforts at keeping employees happy if you're having an inclusive work culture in all other respects. So think about implementing flexible work hours and structures for everyone. That's going to greatly increase the types of candidates and employees that you can recruit and retain. Challenge leaders to include women and diverse candidates in lunches and business development activities. People tend to mentor people that remind them of themselves, which tends to lead to a very narrow hierarchical structure where the people at the top are mentoring people that are just like them. Oh, you went to my same college, we were in the same fraternity, you have the same characteristics that I had when I started in this business, and so let me show you how I did. Well, challenge those leaders to include people who are the polar opposite of them, and take those people under their wing and take them to lunch and business development activities. They might actually learn something from someone who is different in terms of another way to approach the business, and those other folks will have the opportunity to learn from the best as well. Learn to recognize the unconscious bias that we all have. We all have it. Our brains are designed to take in a lot of information and filter it very quickly so that we don't have to, when we're driving down the freeway, know that, well, let's see, there's wheels, there's an engine, there's headlights. Oh, that's a car next to me. We know that's a car. Our brain processes that very quickly. Whether or not it's a VW Beetle or a minivan, we can distinguish very quickly what we're looking at. And that's because our brains do it unconsciously. They take a lot of information, they process it all at once, and that is a great feature. It allows us to have lots and lots of unconscious activities that go on to do lots of very complex tasks, but it also creates an unconscious bias that exists in our brain, which is to immediately jump to stereotypes. We all do it, and we do it because it's fast and it's an easy way to distill information. Is this a threat to me, or is this something that is kind and nice and good? We process information very quickly, we do it intuitively, and we need to be much more intentional about how we do that, how we evaluate people, and what we ultimately conclude about a person. That instantaneous thought is unconscious, and we're not typically aware of it. We need to go beyond it and be intentional about evaluating people based on their actual skill set and not based on an initial and quick reaction. So be intentional about it, become aware of what those biases are so that you can work to overcome them. Actively seek out new perspectives and ideas from all of your employees. This is key to helping employees feel included, helping them feel heard, and recognizing diverse perspectives within the workplace. They all have a value. Whether or not they're ultimately implemented, you can learn something from everyone within your workplace. Revise the golden rule. Instead of treating others as you would like to be treated, treat them as they would like to be treated. This allows you to respect diverse and individual boundaries of your employees. That way they feel respected for who they are and accepted for who they are, which is critical to your employees feeling comfortable within your workplace. Listen, and when in doubt, ask. Apologize when mistakes are made, because we all make them. We will make them. We will revert to stereotypes because of those unconscious biases occasionally. We may say something that offends someone without intending to. And when that happens, the key is to listen and understand why that may have been offensive to someone else, learn from it so that it does not happen again, and accept that person's boundaries. So that's critical to helping folks feel inclusion. And finally, make sure that everyone from the top down understands the benefits of an inclusive culture. It's impossible to implement successful DEI without support from the top. And it goes beyond support in the form of, oh, great, you can form a DEI committee. Great, I'm going to let you run with it. Take it, Natalie, run with it. Good, let me know how it goes. No, you need to have the people at the top directly involved in modeling the behaviors that you're trying to change in the workplace and the skills that you want to encourage in the workplace. If it's not happening by example, it's not going to happen. Your culture will not change if the leaders do not embrace the change and exemplify the change. So helping folks understand the benefits to the organization of DEI, the increase in profits, the increase in retention, is going to be critical to getting the buy-in from the folks at the top. But once you have that buy-in, then you need to make sure that they are implementing it and they're not just leaving it to others to create a diverse work environment. They need to be supportive, they need to model the behaviors, they need to listen, they need to respect differences in the workplace, they need to understand their own unconscious biases, and they need to put their money where their mouth is to the extent that these programs require financial investment and support. So get the leaders involved, ensure the leaders are involved. That's going to help you to have an extremely successful program. At my firm, the DEI initiative is part of the fabric of the leadership of the firm. I have a seat on the board of directors. DEI is a portion of our board of directors meetings, and the strategic plan for the entire firm includes the DEI component. We are looking at ways to tie executive compensation to their participation in DEI efforts so that it has an impact on the individual compensation of the people at the top. So that's important to do. And then also look to your leadership to ensure that you're modeling what you hope others, will do within your workplace. Does your leadership include diverse employees? Does your leadership include women? Does your leadership include people with disabilities? Does your leadership include other types of diversity? Or is your leadership primarily, continuing to be a non-diverse leaders? So again, if you want to promote people within your organization who are diverse, you have to have this inclusive workforce, and you have to have the employees there who want to be there and are mentored and trained into these positions. So inclusion and equity are key to helping you diversify from the top down. So those are my suggestions. I will also be available for questions at the end. Happy to stay later if you have further questions about how you can implement DEI in your workplace, and I will turn it over to Rosalind and Bianca. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Natalie, for sharing all that information. If you all saw my head kind of leave the screen, I was writing some notes, and I had that wow moment when she talked about the resumes and blocking out people's names and blocking out addresses and blocking out hobbies. Never thought of that, but we do it. And these are just so important for us to understand as we go back into our organizations and truly be the champions in our organizations to break open that DE&I whole mission that we should all be on. I don't know what companies are here and who are talking to exactly this morning, but I just want to encourage you to please go back, embrace what you're hearing, open this up. It's going to be, not only does this industry leave a lot of money on the table because we're not reaching out, we're not going beyond where we could, because there's a lot of Americans that desire to have homes, but we're not necessarily reaching all those communities and all those people that want to have homes. And we have people in our country that want good paying jobs, and there are a lot of good paying jobs connected to the mortgage industry. And once again, we want to reach out and bring those in. And not only are you going to increase the business aspect of it, increase your revenue, but it's also, as I listen to Natalie speak, it's going to be personally rewarding to you to think that you're going to be mentoring someone that doesn't look like you and come from your neighborhood that you're accustomed to. And you as a leader in your organization step outside of that box and say, you know what, I'm going to take Rosalind, who I have never met a Black woman before like this, and I've never talked to a Black, I've always dealt with folks that look like me, but I'm going to take her under my wing and I'm going to show her how I got to be where I am. And I'm going to treat her, I love what you said, Natalie, treat her how she wants to be treated, okay? And know that you're doing these things because it's good not only for us as a community and as a country, but it's just good business, okay? We know in this mortgage industry, it's about the business and making money. And I'm here to tell y'all we can still make money and make more of it by opening up diversity and inclusion. And now I am so excited to introduce to you Bianca Bruce, who is going to now give us and share with us an incredible resource that in the last year has become available to the mortgage industry, one that we have needed for a very, very long time. Bianca is co-founder and board member and executive vice president for Access Lending Academy. And Bianca is just, she has just opened me up. She's exciting. And I want you guys, I know this is supposed to be an hour presentation, but I want you to hang in here with us because we're probably going to go a little over that hour. I'm sorry, Susan, but I'm thinking, looking at the time, I think we're going to go a little over that hour, but it's going to be well worth it if you just hang in here with us and write down any questions that you will have, okay? So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bianca, and we're excited to hear what you're going to share with us about a resource that's available to the industry now. Bianca?
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I only have one thing I wish that was different. I wish I could see all of you guys' faces. I'm a mother of 2 young adults, and sometimes I feel like I talk to them without them really listening to me, and I'm just talking to myself. So I'm going to overcome that barrier and think that I'm actually seeing your faces and interacting with you. I want you to take notes. I want you to feel inspired. I want you to connect to your purpose and how DE&I can be a part of what it is that you do every single day. This is a very big conversation, and I know when Paul Gelati, the founder of Access Lending Academy, invited me into this conversation, he and I and Jerry Herrera, the co-founder, we were sitting in a house going over what the need was in the industry and the passion that Paul brings to this education program, this academy, and why. So let's flip the slide and look at some statistics together. So first of all, I want you to know that you are a difference maker by being part of this industry. You contribute to 17% of our economy's growth, of everything that is part of the American dream. I was born and raised in Europe, and when you think of the American dream, you think of a home, the ability to own your own home. And that is connected to the opportunity to have a really viable career. The mortgage lending industry is also one of the fastest growing industries. And one of the things that I want you to think about, ask yourself this question. Think about how you came into the industry. How did you get started? Did you fill out an application? Did you go to college to learn about mortgage lending? Or were you invited by somebody? Were you given access into almost like the secret back door of a really strong and viable industry where you could begin to learn about the workings of what mortgage lending is really about? And then instead of just having a job, you began to work in your career. You began to align your passion and your value and your skills to what it is that the mortgage lending industry does. you began to grow, you began to create a life for yourself, and eventually you probably bought your own home. We are looking at Access Learning Academy as we were shaping this, and as Paul was describing what he was envisioning, we're looking at two things. We're looking at opportunity and we're looking at education. Being able to bring more people into the industry by providing them access to the education that they need to begin to be viable, excited, well-balanced individuals who contribute to the mortgage lending industry and begin to be not just excited about what they're doing, but also shaping companies. So we heard about the importance of company culture. We heard about the importance of impacting your team by hiring a diverse from a diverse pool. Where does this pool come from? How do we have access to diverse individuals? Access Lending Academy bridges that gap for us. If we don't pay attention to a new pool, a fresh and diverse pool of individuals who are excited to join the industry, we are standing to lose a lot of money. Now, I know in the industry we pay attention to that. We pay attention to how we can increase our impact by being financially and fiscally responsible. So we want to pay attention to the fact that our labor deficit will rise to be $10.7 million by 2030. One of the ways to counteract that is for us to really pay attention to the fact that we can train and educate new, fresh talent. So how do we do that? Let's look at the next slide. So Access Lending Academy is this really exciting educational program, and we pay attention to education, not training. Now, there's nothing wrong with training, but I want you to imagine, most of you, as I'm thinking of you sitting in your chairs or maybe lounging around, you're thinking you've had and you have in your wallet a driver's license. I want you to think about who taught you how to drive. I am currently teaching my teenager how to drive, which is a wild experience. Because it's all about staying calm, cool, and collected, and give her access to the opportunity of learning, of really building an experience. Access Lending Academy is about education and the experience. We're not just situationally training, we're creating an experience that this individual can bring to the company that they are going to then be a part of for the duration of their career. So we're looking at fresh talent coming in to learn through 90 days. Throughout 90 days, they get a basic education. That basic foundation is 30 days. In the next 30 days, they're going to get all of that basic foundation and apply it to a lab. That is that hands-on educational program where you go from just reading about how to drive to actually getting into the car, buckling your seatbelt on, being guided by somebody who stays calm, cool, and collected, and helps you to apply that learning that you did that was more theoretical. In those next 30 days, while they're in this interactive lab, they're also learning skills that have to do with their wellness. We want individuals to know who they are. We want them to feel empowered. We want them to feel excited about them and about the industry. We want them to have an understanding about their mental health, about fitness, about nutrition. We want them to feel empowered so that when they join a placement partner in the industry, they are a vibrant and viable and excited part of a team. The next part of their education program, so we are at the next 30 days, so at 90 days, they are going through a paid internship. And throughout this time, they will continue to receive a support so that they can learn how to interview, learn how to meet the needs of a particular employer so that they can understand the value they will play in a team. Let's look at the next slide. So Access Lending Academy is not just about making a difference for the individual, that individual learner. Although we are really excited about the power that the industry has and that education has and the access to the industry for an individual to begin to live truly their best life so they can feel empowered by knowledge and opportunity. It's not just that though, it is about you. It is actually about every single one of you and about the companies where you work. It is about the industry as a whole. Paul often talks about providing lift in the industry. We firmly believe that when our industry is filled with individuals who come from a very diverse background, who are outside of the industry and are learning about who we are, what we do, how we are playing a role in the economy, how they can participate in that year over year, long horizon, we will see a more vibrant industry, an even better respected industry, and an industry that is inclusive. And inclusivity, as we learned today, is a really big part about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's that action piece that Access Lending Academy puts in place. So we provide access for everyone. That means everyone who wants to learn about the industry. We focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just to learn about it and know about it, to actually apply action to it. Taking action on what you know is what propels you forward over time. Knowing that you need to do something is never enough. I sometimes wish it were, because it would make things a whole lot easier. But what we want you to, as a whole, take away from today is that taking action is that critical next step. And guess what? It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We are people who come alongside you, particularly through Access Lending Academy, to give you an opportunity to bring the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion into your companies and take action immediately. Impacting the culture and your bottom line, that is a value proposition that Access Lending Academy talks about often. That is why we're looking at the education program for the learner. We're looking at Access 360 Live, which is our wellness program that we can bring into various companies that our learners participate in, as well as our Access Blueprint, our Access Satellite Education Program, an opportunity for lender partners, for industry partners to take Access's model and apply it and lay it over some of their training, some of their value proposition, some of what they want to achieve, and use Access education in their companies right away. Okay, let's talk about lift. Let's look at the next slide. This is going to be a fun one. So I don't know about you, but I don't often think PowerPoint presentations are fun. So when we create these, we try to make them interesting to look at. So lift, diversity, equity, and inclusion drives lift. Why? Because you will take action. You will take action on these things that you're learning. You will take a note from what Natalie said in redefining the golden rule. That is action in this context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Access Lending Academy, we continue to support partners and learners and our board of directors in taking that action for lift. DE&I produce more profits than an organization that does not focus on DE&I. By 43% higher profits, that's where we can just start. That's an exciting place to start. 43% of something, more of something, is something worth paying attention to in your company culture, in the way that you're hiring, in the way that you're diversifying. I want you to take a look at this plane ride taking off the screen and where you can go with it. 87%, that's the amount that DE&I increased decision-making power. When you have a more diverse team and there's more people around the decision-making table, you will have better decisions just because you have more inclusion and more voices. We want to make better decisions. We want to make more inclusive decisions, and we want to make decisions that aren't just good right now, but they're also good over time. Like Kelly mentioned, the workforce that you are looking at, the growth in the industry that we are looking at, the people who are currently interested in joining the workforce will pay attention to who is included in the decision-making process. At Access Lending Academy, we know that 100% of our candidates, of our learners, will receive ongoing support and development. We are a learning academy that really focuses on the long horizon. We want to support our learners and we want to support our industry so that collectively we can benefit from that growth in our bottom line, that growth in our representation, the growth in how we impact communities. If we have a more diverse workforce, we will have more representation of the industry in communities. More people will be in a viable career that they're excited and passionate about, that is profitable to them, where they understand the value that they hold in that company because they have voice and they have belonging and they have purpose. People with voice, belonging, and purpose return to their communities and talk about how they can be a difference maker. And more people will learn about our industry, and more people will be able to participate in what everyone wants to participate in. And that is the power of home ownership, the American dream. So how can you get involved? Remember, Access Lending Academy is all about bridging that gap, giving access to action. We want to take action. It's important that we know what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. It is important that we know ESG. It's very important to be inclusive, and that means you take action. Here are some of the ways that you can do that. I want to invite you to call Paul right now or text him because he's on his call. So that is his phone number, 415-846-2023. You can find us at accesslendingacademy.com and get much more information. Please follow us on LinkedIn or follow Paul or even myself. But start thinking about taking action, about what you can do next. You can spread the word about Access Lending Academy. You can talk to us about donating time, money, and passion. You can start partnering with Access. One of the most exciting things about working with Access is that we are about innovation. We're about collaboration. We're about making a difference and bridging the gap. So talk to us, talk to Paul, and reach out to us and ask us about what it is that you want to do. Look at accesslendingacademy.com and find out how you can participate. It's about partnering and providing access to learners so that in the long horizon, we can all grow and lift collectively. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Bianca. I know we went a little over, but we started a little later, but I just thought it was important that you all hear all of this wonderful information that these speakers today had to share. I know that once again, this is going to be available on the California MBA's website later so that you can access it and listen to it and share it with those in the industry. Let them know about what California MBA is doing and how it is truly trying to offer the variety of resources for the industry to help you in this space of DE&I. I mean, I have a whole lot more I could tell y'all, but we are already over our time. I don't know if anyone had any questions, but at this point, as I see Ian was able to join us, he is the chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Any of you that were inspired to join, come join us, okay? And
That's right.
I'm going to turn this over to Susan and let her take it from here. Thank you all for coming and joining with us.
Great presentation. Thank all of you for sharing that information. I want to, if you have any questions, you can post those in the questions dialog box. We'll post those to our speakers. But I did want to close out with introducing Ian Rambaran, who's an attorney at Kleindienst and the chair of our California MBA DE&I Committee to close us out for today's webinar. So Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you to everyone. We really appreciate your presentation, and it serves the primary goal of this committee, which is to provide a resource, as Rosalind said, for the members. And this session has been recorded and will be available to the general public, so you could just share it with colleagues who are unable to come today, or re-review it, because I think the information and topics presented really hit the nail on the framework that we're operating under. And this is the second year that the CMBA has supported this committee. And I would like to say thank you to Susan for supporting the committee. And as Natalie touched on earlier, this is a top-down approach, and it's immensely important for everybody to get behind it. And if you have something to contribute, we want to know. There's room for your perspective and your energy and contribution. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. And again, just to reiterate what Ian is sharing, if you have content to share with us, we would love to feature the good work that your company is doing relative to DE&I in your corporate culture. Make sure that you're following us on LinkedIn. We do a lot of marketing on future webinars. We also have a DE&I podcast. So if you would like to be a guest on our podcast, you can contact us and we'll get you on the schedule. I think this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining all of us. Again, thank you to today's presenters, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.